I didn't realize the chili was boiling hot until it hit my scalp. 1 second, I was sitting at the end of the long, beautifully laid table, trying to smile through a fake family reunion. The next, a plate of steaming red chili crashed over my head. The burning was instant. Heat bit into my skin, sliding through my carefully styled gray hair, dripping down my temples and neck. Bits of ground meat and beans clung to my dress. I smelled tomatoes, cumin, and the expensive perfume I'd sprayed on, now ruined and mixed with grease. But the pain wasn't what broke me. It was the silence. 20 people at that table. 20 people who watched it happen. Not one gasp, not one voice telling him to stop. No one pushed their chair back. No one stood up for me. My son Matthew slowly rose from his chair, his face twisted into the cruel smile I knew too well, the one he had sharpened over 45 years of being protected from consequences. He pointed toward the front door like a judge sentencing a criminal. "You've got 10 minutes to get out of my house," he said. His tone was theatrical, almost amused. 10 minutes to get out of my family. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The humiliation was louder than any scream. Beside him, his wife Paige stayed seated, back straight, lips curled in that practiced social smile she wore for everyone. She waited half a second, then started clapping, slowly, deliberately. The sound of her hands coming together echoed in my skull. A few of Matthew's friends at the table joined in, like they were applauding a performance, like I was the joke. I dabbed at my face with my napkin. The cloth smeared chili instead of cleaning it. My hair stuck to my skin. I inhaled deeply, forced my breathing to steady. 67 years of being overlooked, blamed, taken for granted, all compressed into a single moment. And instead of shattering, something inside me finally locked into place. Enough. I reached into my black leather purse, the one I never left home without, the one where I kept things that mattered. My fingers closed around thick paper. I pulled out a manila envelope and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap, papers fanning out between plates, candles, and wine glasses. "That's right," I said, my voice suddenly cold and steady. 10 minutes, and in 10 minutes, everything you think is yours can disappear. Matthew's smile flickered. To understand how a night meant for reconciliation turned into a battlefield with chili burning my skin and legal documents spread across the table like weapons, you have to know where I came from. You have to know what it means to grow up as the child no one chooses. I was born into a house where 2 children lived, but only one truly existed. My brother, also named Matthew. Yes, I gave my son his name later, and no, I don't miss the irony, was the center of our little universe, the golden boy, the sun everyone rotated around. I was the shadow in the corner. Present, useful, forgettable. When Matthew did anything vaguely decent, my mother treated it like a national holiday. He'd come home with a mediocre grade, a C in math, and my mother, Marilyn, would throw a special dinner. "He's trying so hard," she'd say, beaming. He scored a goal in a school football game, and my father, Elias, invited neighbors over. Beer, barbecue, loud laughter. "My son's a real athlete," he'd brag. I would bring home a report card filled with A's. "Very good, Teresa," my mother would murmur, not bothering to look away from her magazine. I once won a regional science competition. I still remember the weight of the medal in my hand, the way my heart raced as I walked through the front door. My father didn't ask what it was for. He just said, "Leave your shoes by the door. you're tracking in dirt. I learned very young that excellence meant nothing if they had already decided you didn't matter. One Christmas, when I was 11, the difference between us became painfully clear. Matthew had been obsessing over a red bicycle for months, the one in the shop window, with gears and shiny chrome handlebars. He talked about it every day. On Christmas morning, there it was, parked in the living room like a small miracle. He shouted, ran circles around it, threw his arms around Mom's neck. Cameras flashed. I know those photos still exist somewhere in old albums. My gift was a mustard yellow sweater, too big by at least 2 sizes. It smelled of mothballs. There was a faint stain on one sleeve that someone hadn't bothered to wash out properly. It was on sale, my mother said. You'll grow into it. I smiled and said, thank you, because that's what I had learned to do. Always be polite, always be grateful, never make trouble. Matthew left the bicycle out in the rain within 3 months. He forgot it in the yard until the chain rusted and the paint dulled. By then, my parents were already talking about what they'd get him next. There was always a next for him. For me, there was, you should be thankful for what you have. The only person who ever seemed to really see me was my grandfather, Robert. When I walked into a room, his face lit up. When I spoke, he put down what he was doing and listened like my words mattered. Nobody else did that. Teresa, he'd say as we walked slowly through his garden, past the roses and jasmine he loved so much. You have fire in your eyes. Don't let anybody put it out. The first time he said that, I was 13. I didn't fully understand, but I kept that sentence like a secret jewel in my pocket. And Grandpa Robert had been a surgeon once, a brilliant one. By the time I knew him, he was retired, but his study still looked like a shrine to medicine. Shelves of thick medical books, jars, old instruments carefully wrapped. He'd let me sit in his big leather armchair and flip through anatomy atlases I barely understood, tracing muscles and arteries with my fingertips. Do you want to be a doctor? He asked me one afternoon. Yes, I answered immediately. I hadn't said it out loud before, but the truth was already there. I want to matter. I want to be remembered for something real. He smiled, that slow, soft smile that deepened the lines around his eyes. Then you will be, he said. And one day, when you've achieved what you're capable of, they'll regret they didn't cherish you sooner. At the time, I thought he just meant my parents would finally say, "We're proud of you." I had no idea how far those words would travel into my future. At 18, I received the letter that should have changed everything. Congratulations, it began. I had been accepted to study medicine at a prestigious university, full scholarship based on my grades and exam scores. Years of sleepless nights had paid off. I remember standing in the kitchen doorway, the letter trembling in my hand. "Mom," I said, voice shaking a little. "I got in. They gave me a full scholarship. I'm going to medical school." She didn't even put her magazine down. "That's nice, dear," she said. "You'll be very busy then, won't you?" My father, sitting at the table with the newspaper, muttered, "It's an expensive field. Don't come crying to us when you can't handle it." Matthew snorted from the couch. "Doctors work insane hours. You'll quit before Christmas. Women aren't built for that kind of pressure." I swallowed the hurt. I had become good at that. Grandpa, on the other hand, showed up the next day wearing his best suit. "Get dressed," he told me. "We're celebrating." He took me to a restaurant I'd only seen from afar. White tablecloths, soft music, We toasted with orange juice because I was too young for wine. To Dr. Teresa, he said, lifting his glass. To the woman who will make the world regret underestimating her. That night, I cried alone in my room. Not because I was sad, not exactly. It was more like grief for something I'd never had. My parents' pride, their love, their approval. I had one person cheering for me, and that should have been enough. But children always hope for more than enough, even when they're almost adults. University and medical school were war, not the kind with soldiers and guns, the kind where every day you fight your own limits. I studied until my eyes burned, until the words on the page turned into smudges. I worked night shifts at a coffee shop, then at a diner, just to cover food and rent. I lived in tiny rooms with peeling paint and thin walls. 4 hours of sleep was a luxury, but I was stubborn. Every time I wanted to give up, I saw Grandpa's face in my mind, heard his voice, "You have fire in your eyes." I refused to let it go dark. Meanwhile, Matthew went to college too, business administration. My parents paid everything: tuition, books, a car, an apartment near campus. He failed first year 3 times. Boys need time, Mom said. He's finding his path, Dad added. I passed exam after exam. I made it through rounds where classmates dropped out. I graduated medical school with honors in 6 years. Matthew took 9 years to scrape together a degree that should have taken 5. When he finally walked across his stage, my parents hired a hall, a caterer, and a band. Over 100 guests, balloons everywhere. They practically engraved his name in gold. When I graduated, Grandpa took me to dinner, just the 2 of us again. He made a toast in a cheap little family restaurant that meant more to me than all the chandeliers in my brother's party. Remember this, Teresa, he said quietly. True family isn't the one that merely shares your blood. It's the one that recognizes your light when everyone else looks away. I didn't know then that he was laying the foundation for the moment my son would empty a plate of chili over my head, and I would finally decide to stop begging the wrong people to love me. Medical residency wasn't a job. It was a form of controlled suffering. Days blurred into nights, and nights blurred into something colder, heavier, 36-hour shifts with no real rest, rushing from one emergency to the next, stitching wounds with trembling hands, making decisions that tilted on the edge between life and death. I existed on caffeine, adrenaline, and the stubborn refusal to collapse. There were moments when I felt like a ghost drifting through hallways lit by fluorescent lights. Moments when I wondered if I was still a human being, or if the hospital had carved me into something else, something harder, sharper, built only for survival. But every time exhaustion threatened to drown me, I heard Grandpa's voice again. You have fire in your eyes. Don't let anyone extinguish it. So I kept moving, one patient at a time, one sunrise at a time. Grandpa visited whenever he could. He'd sit in the cafeteria with a little plastic bag of home-cooked food, rice pudding, roasted chicken, lentil soup, dishes he knew I loved. He'd wait for just 10 minutes of my time. Sometimes our conversations lasted only long enough for me to take a few bites. Sometimes he would just smile at me and say, "I'm proud of you," before I ran back upstairs. Those moments kept me alive, because at home, nothing had changed. When I visited during my rare days off, the conversation was always the same. Matthew's latest scheme, Matthew's latest big idea, Matthew's new girlfriend, his new opportunity, his newest financial disaster. He had decided He was meant to be an entrepreneur. "It's in my blood," he said proudly during one dinner. "I'm not meant to work for anyone. I'm a natural leader who burned through my parents' money like dry leaves in a bonfire." The first venture was a sportswear shop. My parents gave him $50,000 without hesitation. The store closed in 8 months. Unsold inventory, bad location, poor planning, anything you could imagine. "It's part of the learning process," my mother said, patting his hand like he was a child who dropped his ice cream. Next came a food delivery app. He didn't know how to code. He didn't know how to hire the right people. He spent money on advertising before the service even worked. That disaster swallowed another $30,000. Every time he failed, he got comfort, sympathy, encouragement. Every time I succeeded, I got silence. While Matthew stumbled from failure to failure, I kept climbing. After years of grinding through residency, I chose to specialize in cardiovascular surgery, one of the most demanding paths in all of medicine. I wanted the challenge. I wanted to be in a place where excuses didn't survive. For 4 years, I worked under surgeons who had reputations carved by brilliance and brutality. They didn't care who your parents were. They didn't care about your comfort. They didn't care about your tears. All they cared about was skill, precision, and results, and I delivered. I studied until late at night, pored over new research, traveled to conferences I paid for myself. I practiced until my hands could perform procedures with the confidence of instinct. At 38, something extraordinary happened. I was offered the position of Chief of Cardiovascular Surgery at a prestigious hospital, a position doctors 20 years older than me could only dream of. I remember staring at the offer letter in disbelief, my heart pounding. For the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be enough for my family to finally acknowledge me. I called home. "Mom," I said, breathless, "I have news. I've been appointed Chief of Cardiovascular Surgery at Metropolitan General." "That's nice, dear," she interrupted. "Can I call you back? We're organizing a dinner for Matthew." He finally got investors for a new idea. I froze. She continued talking, her voice full of excitement. Not for me, but for him. I don't remember what I said after that. I just remember the sound of the dial tone when the call ended, and the way I slid down to the floor of my apartment and pressed my hands over my face. I didn't cry from disappointment alone. I cried from the realization that I could become the best surgeon in the country and still mean nothing to them. But that night, Grandpa called. "Teresa," he said, voice thick with pride, "your mother told me they should be kissing the ground you walk on." "They don't care, Grandpa," I whispered. "They never have. They don't see you because they cannot understand you. That's not your failure. That's theirs. And mark my words, one day they will beg to be associated with your name." I didn't believe him then, but years later, when my son dumped chili over my head in front of 20 guests, his words would return with startling clarity, a prophecy unfolding right in front of me. Matthew's downward spiral didn't stop. After his consulting disaster, the one where he charged clients for business strategies he copied from free blogs, investors sued him. My parents paid the settlement quietly. He married Paige shortly after. She was beautiful, polished, the kind of woman who knew how to dress for an occasion and how to speak in a way that charmed strangers. But behind her perfect smile, I felt calculation. Their wedding was extravagant, a 6-figure spectacle funded entirely by my parents. When I attended, they sat me at a table near the back with distant cousins and people whose names I barely remembered. During the toast, my father spoke for 15 minutes about how proud he was of Matthew, how he had overcome obstacles. The obstacles were self-inflicted. The recoveries were funded by mom and dad. But nobody mentioned that part. Grandpa sat beside me during the speech. He squeezed my hand when he saw the tears forming in my eyes. "Patience," he whispered. "Everything comes in time." At the time, I thought he meant Matthew would mature, but what he really meant was that consequences always arrive, even for golden children. By my early 40s, Matthew was already knee-deep in his next delusion, real estate development. My parents gave him another $60,000. He bought a house in a declining neighborhood, swore it had unmatched potential. Cheap contractors, delays, overruns, a loss on the sale. Still, nothing changed. Not for him, not for them. During these years, I tried, truly tried, to extend an olive branch. One afternoon, I called him. "Matthew," I said gently, "I heard you're looking for something new. I have connections in hospital administration. There are managerial roles." He cut me off with a laugh. "You want me to be someone's employee? Teresa, I'm not built for that. I'm meant to lead companies, not shuffle papers in a hospital. Besides, you're not exactly one to give career advice. You're just a woman who cuts open bodies for money." The disgust in his voice chilled me. That was the last time I offered him help. Some people don't want a bridge. They want a throne. Meanwhile, Grandpa was aging. His heart was weakening. Ironically, the very organ I had dedicated my life to studying. I reviewed all his medical tests personally. I made sure he had the best care. I spent every free hour with him, sitting in his living room, surrounded by antique books, listening to stories from a life he had lived with passion and purpose. One evening, while we sipped tea, he reached for my hand. "Teresa," he said softly, "I need to talk to you about something important." I felt fear coil in my stomach. "What is it? Are you in pain? Should I call?" "No, my girl, it's not that. It's the future, or what remains of mine." I shook my head. "Don't talk like that. I'm a doctor, and so are you. We both know time is catching up to me, and before I go, I must make sure things are arranged the way they should be." He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope sealed with red wax. My name was written on it. "This is for you," he whispered. "Do not open it until I'm gone. Promise me." I didn't want to accept it. Taking it felt like accepting his death, but he insisted. Inside, he said, were instructions, things he had prepared for years. "Matthew won't like what's in there," Grandpa added with a faint smile. "Neither will your parents. But what I did with a clear mind." "What did you do, Grandpa?" I asked, voice trembling. "Justice," he replied simply. "Delayed justice." I didn't understand then, but when he was gone, 6 months later, I finally discovered what he had prepared. And that discovery became the spark that ignited everything that happened at the dinner where chili burned my skin. Grandpa's funeral was small, quiet, almost painfully dignified, exactly the way he would have wanted it. A few former colleagues, some neighbors, a handful of distant relatives who barely remembered him. My parents attended because it was expected. Matthew and Paige arrived late, whispered excuses about traffic, and spent most of the ceremony scrolling on their phones. I barely noticed them. All I could see was the polished mahogany coffin, the roses on top, the priest's calm voice drifting through the cold air. Each word felt like a thread being cut inside me. He had been the one person who believed in me without conditions. Losing him felt like losing the ground beneath my feet. After the service, people offered their condolences politely, mechanically. My parents left early, citing an important dinner they couldn't miss. Matthew pulled me aside as we walked to our cars. "So, about Grandpa's assets," he said casually, like he was asking about weekend plans. "He had some savings, right? Maybe a house, investments?" I stared at him, stunned. "He just died, Matthew." He shrugged, unfazed. "Yeah, but this stuff matters. We don't want Mom and Dad to get stuck sorting everything. You're the organized one. Let me know when you find the paperwork." I walked away without responding. The distance between us had never felt so clear. That night, I sat in Grandpa's study, the room with dark wood shelves and the faint smell of old books and sandalwood, and held the sealed envelope he had given me months before. My hand shook as I broke the wax seal. Inside, I found a letter in his elegant handwriting and a stack of legal documents. The letter began simply, "My dearest Teresa, if you are reading this, it means I have finally joined your grandmother. Do not mourn too long. I lived a full life, and you were the brightest part of it." Tears slipped down my face as I read. Then the tone shifted, firmer, sharper, the voice of the brilliant surgeon he once was. "I have spent years watching how your parents treated you, how they worshiped Matthew while dismissing your achievements. And I have spent years watching how Matthew grew into a man who takes without giving, who believes the world owes him something. You, on the other hand, owe no one anything. You built your life with your own two hands. You carved your path from determination, not privilege. So I made a decision." As I continued reading, my breath stalled. Grandpa had left everything to me, not just his savings, which were substantial, not just his house, which was fully paid off. He had also left me several investment accounts, a long-term trust fund he had built quietly over decades, artwork he had collected, rare medical books worth thousands, and a portfolio of bonds I never knew he owned. There was a final paragraph, short but powerful. "This is not a reward for being good. It is a correction for what you were denied. Do not feel guilty. Use what I have left you to build the life you deserve. And if Matthew asks, tell him the truth. He was given every opportunity. You made your own." I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed. For years, I had begged for scraps of validation. For years, I had accepted being invisible. Now here was the only person who had ever seen me completely, leaving me proof that I mattered. The days that followed were complicated. When my parents discovered the contents of the will, my mother clutched her chest like she'd been betrayed. "This isn't fair," she kept saying. "Your brother deserved something too. He had everything his whole life," I replied calmly. "Grandpa chose this." My father muttered something about favoritism and disrespect, conveniently forgetting the years they had spent treating me like an afterthought. Matthew reacted the way I expected. He stormed into my apartment, face red, fists clenched. "Give me half," he demanded. "You don't need all that. I'm his grandson too." I stared at him. "You weren't left anything, Matthew. Grandpa made that decision himself. That old man was manipulated," he snapped. "You always were his little pet project. Well, I'm not letting you walk around acting like you're better than us because he gave you money." I took a breath. I'm not acting like I'm better. I'm acting like someone who finally got what she earned. He scoffed, grabbed a glass from my counter, and smashed it on the floor. That moment, the rage, the entitlement, the sheer disrespect, told me something important. Matthew didn't just want money, he wanted dominance. Grandpa's will wasn't about wealth. It was about ending the hierarchy my parents had created. He had removed the foundation Matthew stood on, and Matthew couldn't stand the idea of me being on equal ground or higher. It was the first time I realized that my brother didn't simply dislike me. He resented my existence. Years passed. I invested wisely, saved carefully, upgraded my home, supported medical charities, expanded my research. I became someone the world couldn't ignore, even if my family tried. And then, in my 40s, something happened that changed the course of my life again. I found out I was pregnant. The father, a kind, quiet man I had been seeing, wanted nothing to do with responsibility. He left 2 months later. I didn't chase him. I told myself I would raise this child with the love I never had. I would give him support, validation, boundaries. I would not repeat the mistakes my parents made. When my son was born, I named him Matthew, after my grandfather. Not my brother, never my brother. For a while, life felt full, exhausting, but full. I worked long shifts and cared for my baby. I navigated surgeries by day and sleepless nights by night. I promised myself every day, my son will never feel unseen. But children grow, and love, especially unconditional love, is a dangerous thing in the wrong hands. Little by little, I started noticing something unsettling. My son had charm, confidence, intelligence. He also had something darker, something I had ignored because I wanted to believe love could rewrite destiny. He knew how to get what he wanted. He knew how to manipulate with a smile. He learned early that people bend to affection and to guilt. He was clever, unpredictable, and frighteningly persuasive. I told myself, he's just strong-willed. He'll grow out of it. I told myself, he's smart. He'll use it for good. I told myself, he's my son. I know him. But the truth was simpler. He had inherited more from my parents and my brother than I ever imagined. And all the love in the world wasn't going to stop him from becoming the man who would one day stand in front of 20 people and pour boiling chili over my head. Raising my son alone should have been the hardest chapter of my life. But in the beginning, it didn't feel that way. In the early years, little Matthew was affectionate, curious, and startlingly bright. He clung to me when I left for work, ran toward me when I returned home, and insisted on sleeping in my bed, even when he was old enough for his own. Every evening after my hospital shifts, I would sit on the carpet with him, watching him stack wooden blocks into delicate towers and then knock them over with dramatic flair. He would look up at me with those deep brown eyes, waiting for my applause. I always gave it. Maybe that was my first mistake, because the signs didn't appear suddenly. They revealed themselves in fragments, scattered across years, like warning bells I ignored. When he was 6, he lied easily, effortlessly. I found broken glass in the kitchen sink one afternoon, and he blamed an imaginary friend with such conviction that even I hesitated for a moment before realizing the truth. When he was 8, he learned how to cry on command, actual tears produced instantly and strategically. When he was 9, his teacher called to say he'd cheated on a test and then manipulated his classmates into defending him so convincingly that the entire class got punished instead. I asked him why. He shrugged. Because they believed me. No remorse. No fear of consequences. Just curiosity. As if he were studying human emotions, like a scientist observing creatures in a tank. I remember tucking him into bed that night. He looked up at me and smiled sweetly, brushing his fingertips against my cheek. Mom, you still love me, right? That question pierced me in a way I'll never fully understand. I kissed his forehead. Of course I do. He smiled wider, satisfied, not in the way a child is reassured by love, but like someone who confirmed a hypothesis was correct. Love meant leverage. Something inside me tightened. During his teenage years, the shift became impossible to ignore. He had charisma, dangerous charisma. Teachers adored him. Girls followed him everywhere. Friends competed for his attention. Adults praised him for his politeness, his confidence, his potential. At home, though, the charm faded like a costume discarded after a performance. He manipulated me with frightening precision. If you loved me, you'd let me stay out later. Everyone else's parents let them do this. You owe me. You chose to raise me alone. You're too strict. No wonder Dad left. The first time he said that, it felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. He was 14. I tried everything. Therapy, boundaries, consequences. But Matthew learned how to say exactly what professionals wanted to hear. He could mimic empathy like an actor memorizing lines, then walk out of the office and transform into someone else entirely. I started realizing something terrifying. My son understood emotions. He just didn't feel them the way others did. One evening, when he was 15, I found a stack of my checks missing. When confronted, he smiled calmly, too calmly, and said, "I wasn't stealing, I was borrowing. You have plenty." I told him money doesn't appear magically. He lifted an eyebrow. "Yours does." I warned him that actions have consequences. He laughed. "Not for people who know how to avoid them." The way he said it, cold, deliberate, left me sleepless for nights. He wasn't bragging. He was stating a fact, something he'd proven to himself repeatedly. I tried to redirect him. I bought him art supplies, a guitar, books on philosophy, engineering kits, anything to channel his brilliance into something constructive. He tried each hobby for a few days, mastered the basics effortlessly, then tossed them aside with bored disdain. "Too easy," he'd say, or "not worth my time." I asked him once what was worth his time. He looked at me with a calmness that chilled me to my bones. People are the only thing worth studying. When he turned 18, he moved out, or rather, he announced he was moving out as if it were a business transaction. He hugged me, but there was no warmth in it, just rehearsed affection. "Don't worry," he'd said. "I'll come back for dinner sometimes, maybe holidays." He didn't. The visits stopped. The calls dwindled. But whenever he did contact me, it was always because he wanted something. Money, approval, information, support, anything that benefited him. I kept giving because that's what parents do. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But over time, I noticed something else. A shadow in his voice. A strange politeness that felt more like calculation than respect. I wasn't his mother. I was a resource. A well he could draw from whenever he needed something. Then one day, out of nowhere, he arrived at my doorstep with a bright smile and said, "Mom, I'm throwing a party at my friend's place. You should come." He never invited me to anything, ever. I felt hope stir inside me like a fragile flame. Maybe he was changing. Maybe he wanted to reconnect. Maybe the distance and coldness were phases he was outgrowing. I spent extra time choosing my clothes, straightening my hair, applying makeup I hadn't worn in months. I wanted him to see me, not just as a mother, but as someone worth respecting. When we arrived, people greeted him with enthusiasm, admiration. He introduced me to everyone with effortless charm. Everyone, this is my mom. Isn't she amazing? I felt warmth spread through my chest. For a brief moment, I believed he meant it. Then I noticed something strange. The way his eyes flicked around the room, scanning reactions, watching people's faces the way a chess player watches the board. Something inside me stirred uneasily. The kitchen smelled strongly of spices, a pot simmering on the stove. Matthew guided people toward it, laughing, joking, telling stories. He stood beside me with a smile so perfect it almost looked staged. "Mom," he said softly, "you know I love you, right?" Before I could answer, he picked up the heavy pot of chili, and with no hesitation, no sign of emotion, no warning, he tipped it forward. The scalding chili cascaded over my head, shoulders, face, arms, burning, searing, blinding heat. The world became fire. I heard screaming, my own and others, and the sound of the pot hitting the floor. Through the agony, through the panic, through the chaos, I saw him, standing perfectly still, watching, studying, observing my pain like a scientist analyzing an experiment. His expression wasn't anger, or regret, or shock. It was curiosity, pure, cold, chilling curiosity. And that was the moment I understood. The boy I raised wasn't lost. He was never mine to save. And everything that came next, the hospital, the police, the investigation, would unravel truths I had spent a lifetime trying not to see. The hospital lights always felt bright, but that night they were merciless. I sat on a cold metal examination table with my scalp throbbing, my face red and swollen from the burns. A nurse gently dabbed ointment on my forehead, wincing as though she felt the pain for me. "Who did this to you, ma'am?" she finally asked. My lips trembled. "My son." She froze for a moment, sympathy and disbelief mixing in her eyes. "Oh, I'm so sorry." I stared ahead, blank. I had no tears left. The shock had numbed me, not just physically, but in places I didn't know could go numb, because the burns would heal. But the truth behind them, that wound was carved deeper. A detective arrived, a tall man with tired eyes and a mustache that looked like it carried every story he'd heard in his 20 years of duty. "I'm Detective Howard," he said softly. "We need to go over what happened." He had a notebook ready. I had no strength to answer. He waited patiently. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded unfamiliar, as if it belonged to someone far older and far more broken. "It wasn't an accident." "Did he intend to harm you?" the detective asked. I replayed the moment in my head, my son's expression, cold and steady as he poured the boiling chili over my head, the way he stepped back just enough to avoid being splashed, the complete lack of shock on his face. "He watched it happen," I whispered. "He wanted it to happen." Detective Howard scribbled something, his jaw tightening. "Did anyone intervene?" I shook my head. No one moved. They all watched. He hesitated. "Did they encourage it?" The memory came back sharp and humiliating. The applause, the clapping, the smiles. "Yes," I said. "They clapped." The detective paused mid-scribble. He looked at me with a mix of shock and pity. "I know this is painful," he said gently, "but you're safe now, and you don't have to go back to that house. Safe." The word tasted strange. Because what was safety when the person you gave life to tried to break you? The days after the attack felt unreal. I stayed home from work. My colleagues offered to cover my shifts, bringing soups and flowers I couldn't bring myself to appreciate. I kept the curtains closed. I didn't answer calls. I didn't eat properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw chili pouring in slow motion. Every time I tried to rest, I heard the applause again, mocking, rhythmic, haunting. But worst of all, I saw Matthew's face, not angry, not sad, not conflicted, just curious, as if my suffering were a fascinating study. That was the expression that cut deepest. Not cruelty, not hatred, but fascination. A knock at my door finally broke through the fog. I assumed it was a neighbor, but when I opened it, I froze. It was my parents. My mother stood stiffly, her hands clasped together. My father hovered behind her, his eyes darting everywhere but my face. I didn't speak. "Teresa," my mother finally said, "we came to talk." I stepped aside reluctantly. They walked in as if entering a stranger's home. My mother examined my bandaged forehead, the healing patches on my scalp, the ointment on my cheeks. "Oh dear," she said, shaking her head. "It's worse than we thought." Something inside me snapped at her tone. Not concern, not guilt, but inconvenience. "Why are you here?" I asked. My father cleared his throat. "We heard what happened." "Heard?" I said bitterly. "From who? The guests who clapped?" My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. My mother continued, "Your brother is very upset. He says he didn't mean to hurt you." Things got out of hand. A laugh escaped me, sharp and humorless. Out of hand? He poured boiling food on my head. He invited an audience. He told me to leave his family in 10 minutes. "That's not what he told us," she said quietly. "Of course it isn't." My father stepped forward. "Look, Teresa, your brother made a mistake, a big mistake, but pressing charges will ruin his life." My breath caught. "Oh," I whispered, "so that's why you're here." "Teresa," my mother said softly, "whatever happened, he's your son." "He is my son," I agreed, "and that's why it hurts more." My father tried another angle, one so familiar it made me nauseous. "You're stronger than him. You've always been stronger. Let this go. Don't destroy the family." There it was, the line they always used to silence me. I straightened my back. "Let me ask you something," I said quietly. If I had poured burning chili on Matthew's head in front of 20 people, would you tell him not to press charges? My mother's face tightened. My father shifted. I didn't think so. They had no answer, but I did. "Get out." My mother blinked. "What?" "Both of you. Leave. Now." "Teresa, don't." "Out." I pointed at the door. My voice didn't rise. I didn't yell. I didn't tremble. It was the voice of a woman who finally understood the truth. They never came to protect me. They came to protect him, just like always. My father tried once more. "We just want peace." "No," I said. "You want silence." Those are not the same. They left without another word. For the first time in my life, I locked the door and didn't feel guilty. But the world wasn't done reminding me of the truth. 2 days later, Detective Howard called. "We need you to come to the station, ma'am. Something has come up." My pulse quickened. "Is it about Matthew?" "Yes, and his finances." "Finances?" There was a pause before he spoke again. "Ma'am, I think you should hear this in person." That was the moment everything began to unravel. The moment I realized the chili wasn't an isolated act of cruelty, but the first crack in a much larger truth. A truth that would expose lies, fraud, double lives, manipulation, and secrets that had been rotting beneath the surface for years. Secrets so big, so devastating, that when I finally uncovered them, my entire world shifted. And this time, I wasn't just a victim. I was becoming something else entirely. Someone my son would soon fear. Someone my family could no longer silence. Someone my grandfather always knew I could be. The police station was colder than I expected, artificially bright, sterile, and humming with the low murmur of strangers dealing with their own disasters. I sat across from Detective Howard in his small interview room, the walls bare except for a clock whose ticking felt too loud, too sharp. He slid a folder across the table. "Ma'am, before we open this, I want you to know something." I looked up at him, unsure whether to brace myself. "What?" I whispered. "You're not the only one your son has hurt." The words made my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" My voice cracked. Detective Howard took a slow breath, then opened the folder. Inside were sheets and sheets of documents, printed emails, bank statements, copies of complaints, screenshots of text messages from people I didn't know. "What is all this?" I reached for the papers with trembling fingers. "Complaints," he said. 27 complaints filed against your son over the past 4 years. I stared at him, stunned. Complaints? For what? For fraud. The word didn't register at first. Fraud? I repeated, as if hearing it in a foreign language. He slid one of the pages toward me, an online review, a furious message, a warning on some forum about fake business consultants. "Your son has been running something that resembles a scam," the detective explained, offering business guidance, asking for upfront payment, then vanishing or giving purposely vague advice. My pulse quickened. "He never mentioned anything like this," I murmured. "I'm sure he didn't, but several victims provided evidence, and after what happened to you, a few came forward again, thinking you might help share information." I shook my head, but he never had a proper business, not one that lasted. "That's exactly the point," he said quietly. "He jumps from one venture to another, and each time it collapses, the pattern is similar. Large upfront payments, no delivery, excuses, then disappearance." My breath caught. Pieces of the past clicked together like a cruel puzzle. Matthew's ventures, his constant need for money, his anger when I offered him honest job leads, his sudden lifestyle drops, the way he always acted, offended when asked practical questions. Detective Howard continued, "We believe he's been hiding the extent of his debts, and he may be connected to some predatory lenders." I closed my eyes. My brother, my parents' golden child, the center of their universe, was drowning in the consequences of his own recklessness, and instead of facing them, he had turned his anger on me. There was a long silence. Then the detective added, "But the most concerning part isn't the money, it's the escalation." "Escalation?" I whispered. He nodded. "The violence." I felt my heart stop. "What violence?" "You're the first case with physical harm," he said. "But we've received statements from neighbors about threats. A few witnesses reported shouting matches, broken items, smashing furniture, anger spirals." I swallowed hard. It wasn't just fraud. It wasn't just entitlement. It wasn't just jealousy. Matthew was losing control. Detective Howard leaned forward. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something important." I nodded numbly. "Do you believe your son could hurt you again?" My throat closed. Images flashed in my mind like lightning. His hand gripping the pot, his eyes burning with something wild. the applause behind him, his voice commanding me to leave. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I think he could." Howard exhaled with a grim expression. "Then my advice is simple. Keep your distance and prepare yourself. Things may get worse before they get better." A chill ran through me, colder than the station air. "Detective, what do I do now?" "Protect yourself," he said softly, "and don't confront him alone." I nodded, though a part of me was still stuck, frozen in disbelief. My son, my own flesh and blood, committing fraud, threatening people, escalating to physical harm, and I was the breaking point. When I got home, the world felt different. The apartment was silent, too silent. I placed the papers on the kitchen counter and stared at them. First my parents' denial, then the dinner ambush, then the chili, the now fraud, violence, victims. It made me wonder, had all of this always been there? Or had I simply refused to see it because I wanted to believe my family wasn't beyond saving? I pressed my palm to my forehead, feeling the healing burns. The truth was cruel in its simplicity. I didn't raise this man. My parents did. They coddled him, excused him, paid his way out of consequences, fed his delusion of brilliance. And somewhere in that twisted loop of praise and protection, he learned that hurting me didn't matter, that I was disposable, that my accomplishments meant nothing, that I was always the one who could take the fall. The next blow came unexpectedly. 3 days later, I received something in the mail, a large yellow envelope, no return address, no explanatory note, just one item inside, a printed photo of my grandfather and me in his rose garden, a photo I didn't know existed. On the back, a message in his handwriting. "My girl, if they ever try to break you, remember what I always told you. You owe them nothing. Stand tall." My hands shook violently as I read the words. He knew. He saw everything long before I did, and he had left me weapons I didn't even realize were weapons. Truth, documentation, encouragement, preparation. My grandfather had been fighting for me even after death. I pressed the photo to my chest and sobbed for the first time since the attack, not out of weakness, but out of a realization so piercing it felt like a new kind of strength. I was not alone, not as long as his memory lived in me. That night, an unexpected call came. The phone rang twice before I picked up. "Teresa?" A voice I didn't immediately recognize. "Yes, this is Anthony, your grandfather's lawyer." My breath hitched. "Anthony, why are you calling?" There was a brief pause. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. The sentence that took this story from a family tragedy to something much, much bigger. "I think it's time," he said. "Time for you to know what your grandfather left behind for you, beyond the will." A shiver climbed up my spine. "What do you mean?" "I can't discuss it over the phone, but what he prepared, it explains everything. Why he trusted you, why he protected you, and why he feared what your family might do." My heartbeat quickened. "Come to my office tomorrow at noon," he said. "And Teresa, be ready." "For what?" "For the truth, all of it." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the city lights filtered through the curtains. I knew something was coming, something that would break open every lie, every secret, every manipulation tucked beneath the tidy rug of my family's history. And this time, I wasn't afraid, not anymore, because this story, this journey, was no longer about what they had done to me. It was about what I was about to do. The day after I visited the police station, Anthony, the lawyer who handled my grandfather's will, called me urgently. His tone was calm, but his words carried weight. Teresa, your grandfather prepared something you still haven't seen. And after what your family did, it's time. When I arrived at his office, he had only one small box on the table and a letter with my name written in my grandfather's familiar handwriting. Inside the box were documents, bank transfers, loan assignments, and signed agreements. My grandfather had spent years preparing for this moment. He had quietly gathered every piece of information about Matthew's debts, lies, and failed businesses. He had worked with accountants and investigators, planning for the day Matthew's destruction would explode onto everyone around him. Anthony placed the letter in my hands. "Read it," he said softly. I opened it. My grandfather's voice came alive on the page. "My girl, if you're reading this, it means your family finally pushed you past the point of silence. This is not revenge. This is protection of you and of the people Matthew has hurt. You cannot fix him, but you can stop him." Tears blurred my vision. Anthony explained the rest simply. My grandfather had left a portion of his estate specifically for one purpose: to give me the legal power to hold Matthew accountable. He had already prepared the pathway for me to buy Matthew's debts one by one at discounted rates. The documents for those purchases were now complete. In other words, I now controlled nearly all of Matthew's financial life. His loans, his second mortgage, his unpaid balances, all of it. And with that control came something else. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't powerless. Anthony leaned back and looked at me gently. "You can walk away from all of this," he said. "You don't owe them anything." I shook my head. "No, if I walk away, he will hurt more people. This time, I need to bring the truth to the table and end this story." So I went back to that house, the same place where he humiliated me, the same dining room where the chili burned into my skin. This time, the room was silent. My parents sat stiffly. Paige stood by the wall, arms crossed. Matthew looked pale, nervous, unsure. I placed the folder of documents on the table. Calmly, I said, "Your debts are now mine." Matthew's jaw dropped. Paige gasped. My mother whispered, "How could you do this?" I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply told the truth. "You poured boiling food on me, Matthew. You humiliated me for sport. Now I'm giving you something you've never given anyone, a chance." I laid out the terms. He would refund every victim. He would shut down every fraudulent business. He would get a real job and make real payments. He would pay rent on time for the house that now legally belonged to me. And if he didn't, every document would go to the authorities. Every victim would speak. And for the first time, my brother would meet consequences instead of excuses. He looked at me with fear, not anger. For the first time in his life, he understood something. I was done being the quiet one. I was done being invisible. I was done being their backup plan. I turned to leave. 10 minutes, I reminded him softly. "That's what you gave me. Now you have 6 months." The door clicked behind me, and with that sound, something in me closed forever. 6 months. That's how long I gave him. 6 months to prove he could live inside the real world instead of the fantasy my parents built around him. 6 months to take responsibility instead of hiding behind lies, excuses, and the softness of people who refused to let him fall. The days after I confronted him were strangely quiet. No calls, no screaming, no apologies, just silence, cold, heavy silence that felt like a new language between us. I thought maybe he would ignore everything I told him, But then, slowly, I began to see changes. Not dramatic ones, not miracles, but small cracks in the arrogance he had always carried like armor. The first sign was an email forwarded to me by Anthony. A message Matthew sent to one of his past clients. 5 words. No excuses, no manipulation. I owe you a refund. I'm sorry. I stared at the sentence for a long time. Then another message arrived the next day, and another, each one short, awkward, almost uncomfortable to read. He was learning humility the same way a child learns to walk, unsteady, clumsy, but trying. He sold his electronics. He sold 2 watches he used to parade around as success milestones. He even sold the expensive leather briefcase he used to carry empty, just for show. The money went to victims, one payment at a time, not because he wanted redemption, but because for the first time in his life, he understood consequences didn't evaporate just because he wanted them to. Meanwhile, my parents tried to repair something that couldn't be repaired. They sent messages. We miss you. Let's talk. We acted out of fear. Family shouldn't be divided like this. But every message felt like a performance. They didn't miss me. They missed the version of me who stayed quiet, stayed small, stayed available whenever Matthew blew up his life. That version of me was gone. One day, after 4 months of silence, my mother sent a final message. You were always strong, stronger than we knew how to handle. It was the closest thing to truth she had ever given me. I read it once and didn't reply. Strength had always been treated as disobedience in my family. Now it was simply part of me. Time passed, seasons changed. My career settled back into its familiar rhythm. Long nights, surgeries that demanded everything, grateful families, exhausted but fulfilled mornings. But something inside me was different. I no longer operated with the invisible weight of trying to be enough for people who didn't know how to value me. I no longer carried my family like a ghost clinging to my shoulders. Instead, I carried my grandfather. Every time I walked into an operating room, I remembered the way he looked at me, proud, certain, unwavering. Every time I gave advice to a young medical student, I felt the warmth of his voice, telling me I had fire in my eyes. That fire burned brighter now, not for recognition, but for purpose. So I used part of his inheritance to create the Robert Foundation, a scholarship program for students from broken homes, students carrying heavy families and heavier dreams. I didn't want them to feel invisible the way I did for decades. I didn't want another brilliant mind dimmed by neglect or jealousy. In the first year, we sponsored 12 students, then 22, then 47. Every one of them, in some way, reminded me of myself. Then one afternoon, everything came full circle. I received a small, folded piece of mail without a return address. No fancy envelope, no dramatic introduction, just one piece of paper. Inside was a single sentence. Debt payment for month 5 is attached. I'm trying. Matthew. There was a cashier's check with it. Not much, but honest money. For a moment, I didn't know whether to cry or simply breathe. I didn't forgive him. Not fully. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a bridge someone has to walk across, plank by plank. He had only taken a few steps, but he had taken them. And I had taken mine too. Away from pain, away from begging for love, toward a life that finally felt like mine. A year later, Matthew finished paying back 3 of his victims completely. He started working in retail, a modest job, nothing glamorous, but he showed up. He earned his own paycheck. He didn't lie about promotions or secret projects. he was humbled. Life had finally taught him what my parents never did. As for my parents, we never returned to what we were. We became polite strangers with shared history and nothing else, and it was okay. Not every story needs reconciliation to be complete. Some stories simply need closure. The night everything truly ended, I visited my grandfather's grave. I brought a single white rose and placed it against the headstone. The evening breeze was cool, the sky soft with the colors of sunset. I did it, I whispered. I didn't let them break me. I didn't let silence define me. And I didn't become cruel, even when cruelty was all they offered. The wind rustled the leaves above me, and for a second, I could almost hear his voice. Stand tall, my girl. You are never small. I smiled through the ache in my chest. Then I walked away, quiet, steady, and finally free. Outrow plus CTA for your YouTube video. If you listened until the end, thank you. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about strength, healing, and the moment you finally choose yourself. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, like the video, subscribe. For more real-life inspired stories, turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode, and comment, I stand tall, so I know you're part of this family. See you in the next story. Stay strong, stay kind, and remember, your worth does not depend on who fails to see it.